it's okay to feel uncomfortable. I think sometimes just that feeling of, oh, this is really daunting, this is really intimidating, is enough to be overwhelming. So don't let it be overwhelming. It's very, very normal, very natural to be feeling this with any kind of new role. And I guess from my own personal experiences, having good supportive people around you to support you on that journey, having someone that could potentially even coach you through some of these things, even just having good people around you that might not necessarily work with you, who are going through the same sorts of things and, sharing tips and tricks with them. Invest in this. It's great that they're doing your course, Julia. This shows that, they care about this and they're thinking about it and they're investing time in it. And we minimize what just thinking about something does for you. It actually helps you a lot, spending that time wondering, why do I feel a bit not so confident in this? How can I overcome that? What sort of strategies can I use next time? Or who can I call on to help me with this particular thing?
I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
Welcome to the We Are Actuaries podcast, where you'll meet leaders who use their actuarial powers to solve a range of problems and make a real difference. I am your host, Julia Lessing, and I'm a qualified actuary based in Australia. I help actuaries develop communication and leadership skills to build great actuarial careers. So settle in, learn from the best, and be inspired.
Hi everyone, today I'm joined by Dr. Jananie William, who is a qualified actuary with a PhD, and across her career she's worn many hats. At the moment she's a university lecturer and researcher and a consultant, and previously she's worked in corporate actuarial roles. Jananie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Julia. It's really a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. And so today we're talking a little bit about communicating with confidence. And I know this is an area that lots of actuaries, myself included, really struggle with. So really looking forward to hearing some of your tips for people who are building their confidence in that area, whether it's presenting to a large group or in meetings day to day. But before we get into that, I'm really keen to hear a little bit about your career today. Can you tell us a little bit about your career path so far?
Sure, and you've just given a nice little summary already, but as people can probably already gather, it's not really a path that's well travelled. So I have taken a somewhat non-traditional path in my career, but to be honest, to start with, it started out very typically in that when I graduated from university with actuarial studies, I started out in one of the big four consultancies. I started in a general insurance team, did that for a few years, and then I moved overseas, as many, I guess, young Australian actuaries especially do, and I worked over in London in a general insurance company over there. So the start of my career was very much in the GI space, and I had a taste of the consulting world and the corporate in-house world as well. Obviously had a great time in London, travelled, ate a lot of food, shopped a lot, worked a lot. But inevitably I was over there with my husband, and we started to think about having a family, and then the natural pull came to come back home. And I think that was the first real point in my career where I really started to think quite critically about, well, what's the next step for me, and also what I wanted life to look like with young children. And so we did move back home, and for a whole host of reasons, I did find myself at home. I'd like to say I had lots of choices. I did, but I also had to be at home with my young children for an extended period of time, let's put it that way. And I think a lot of people can relate when they become parents, particularly actuaries, that, being at home with kids isn't what you're used to, isn't what you've been trained for. And I really, no different, right? A whole new set of skills that are very useful, but I was really itching to do something actuarial, something else. And I'd always wanted to do a PhD. I just didn't think it would come that soon. But I thought, why not? And some people think I'm crazy. But for me, it was a real lifeline in that time. It gave me something to do that felt very productive and felt like I was really contributing, and now to a very new space. So it also gave me that opportunity to move in a different direction. And my research now is very much in the public health and public policy space. And my PhD was the start of that journey into a new area. And I guess the rest, as they say, it's history. Here I am still doing it. So clearly I liked it. It still gave me the opportunity to do the consulting work that I wanted to do. And it did give me that change, I guess, in the types of work that I do. I still very much love being an actuary and very much love doing the actuarial work. And so that's a big part of what I do. And of course, as an added bonus, I get to teach this new fantastic generation of young people coming through and young actuaries coming through. And that's, part of my job that I take very seriously and really enjoy as well.
And you're very good at it.
Oh, thank you. That's
It is really exciting to see the profession developing and to see the younger cohorts of actuaries coming through, and just how much more opportunity I think there is for different areas and to work in different spaces, and yeah, it's really exciting. It's really exciting to see where the profession can go.
I love the diversity. I think there are so many opportunities now for actuaries to do things that we didn't do 20 years ago when I first
Same.
Yeah. I mean,
Same.
It's a big, wide world. And I love seeing how actuaries are taking their skills and just applying them in such different areas and doing so much good with it. And it's very inspiring.
It is inspiring. It is inspiring. So one of the things we've talked about before is this idea of confidence when speaking and presenting. And, I think moving into different areas and becoming more senior as an actuary, these sorts of skills become almost essential, but for many of us quite terrifying. I know I often lose sleep before a big presentation or an important meeting or something like that. And I always love hearing your perspective on how we can think about things and what we can do to overcome those nerves. But I want to start with this concept of imposter syndrome. And I know we've talked about this before. What's your take on what imposter syndrome is, and why do people feel this?
Yeah, look, Julia, we've talked about this. We have. And I lost sleep before today. Even the smallest. I'm not at all immune. I love to think that imposter syndrome is not something that I've ever experienced. But truthfully, there have been moments where I felt, and as you've said, it's been times when I've had big changes in my career, and especially that first transition into a manager role. So for those who aren't familiar with the term, it's essentially this feeling of self-doubt. And it's really self-doubt. It's a feeling that we have about our own abilities. And usually it comes when someone else has either given us a new role or asked us to do something. So it usually comes when other people feel that we have the right skills and the abilities and the expertise, but we lack confidence, so there's self-doubt, there's insecurity. It can lead to a feeling of being intimidated or overwhelmed in the situations that we're in. I know that you and I have often talked about it in regards to presenting to very large groups. That is intimidating, full stop. But the imposter part comes in our own self-talk, feeling like, we are a fraud or, we're an imposter, even though someone else has thought you're the one to do this. So often my words to my friends that experience this is, well, if not you, then who, right? If not you, and I usually use different words depending on how well I know you. Yep. We don't see ourselves in the same way sometimes that we see other people. And I think, for starters, let me just say actuaries are in a good place. We've worked very hard to get to where we are, and especially if we're talking about people who are now in management type roles. They've probably studied a whole bunch of exams. They've probably even qualified, but there are many, many reasons why we can still doubt our own selves, even when we're highly qualified. And often it's actually those high achieving people that feel this. So it's quite natural for actuaries to lack confidence as well.
So it's normal. So it's normal for us to feel this way. And lots of us do.
I think it's very normal. And if you're not feeling it, great. But if you are, don't make yourself
feel alone.
But yeah, exactly. And I think that helps a lot of people. But I think for some people, and I'm actually one of these people, I just want to fix it. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not so bothered about not feeling alone and so forth, although that's very helpful to know. Yeah. But I want to know, how do I actually get on top of this? And look, I didn't even have the words for it when I became a manager. But I think back in those days, we didn't talk about this enough.
You're listening to the We Are Actuaries podcast, brought to you by the Guardian Actuarial Leadership Program. If you're looking for a tailored training program to help you build your communication and leadership skills, registrations are now open. Head over to guardianactuarial.com.au for more information.
But what I did have is a very supportive manager. And at the time, and I think for some people, you don't need to blow this out of proportion. To me, now that I reflect back, that first time I felt it, it was really just a minor road hump in my career. At the time, it felt overwhelming. So take the part in that if you're feeling this way. But I had a great manager who just, to be honest, it was just encouragement, positive affirmations like, Jananie, you're a great speaker. You know, you should speak up more. I mean, you have so many great things to say. You contribute well. And I was like, really? You know, do I? Like, does it matter? Right? And he was just like, of course, like, you know, and just that's all it took, like, to get over those that initial new role and those initial feelings that I'd never really felt before in that sort of way. Some people may have felt this long before they got to their first manager role. And for those people who feel like they need to reflect a bit more deeply, I think there's a whole bunch of research in this. There's a lot of psychology around it. And I'm not a psychologist, but I mean, self-reflection is part of any of this sort of thing when you're really struggling with a feeling that you don't like. Trying to understand where it comes from is sometimes helpful. So, you know, there could be cultural factors. You know, you could have grown up in a home where you were told not to speak, for example. You know, someone might have, you know, people might have told you to shut up even. You know, that's why that word's not allowed in my house. You know, we don't stop each other from speaking. If someone needs to say something, you're allowed to say it, obviously with respect, you know. So there's ways of raising people that have, you know, impact on them later on in life. And there might be some deep reasons there. There might be things that have happened during your actuarial journey, you know, while you were studying for exams, a failure of an exam or 2 or 3 or many, you know. It can happen and it can diminish our confidence. And so trying to work through that kind of thing sometimes is helpful for people. And it's not to make you feel any worse. It needs to be used in a way that, I think for me personally, the way that things like that have helped is to then know that feeling, to own that feeling, to put it in a place, and then over time, it bothers me less, right? So, you know, I know what it is. I know it's pretty normal for me to feel this way about this kind of thing. And I can just own it. I do what I need to do to manage it. You know, sometimes you can come up with, there's other ways to manage these sort of negative feelings. And then over time, ideally, it doesn't have such an overwhelming impact on you. And that's ultimately, I think, where you need to get to.
Yeah. So recognizing that this is something that happens. It often happens when we're out of our comfort zone. It's very normal, especially for high achievers like actuaries.
Yeah.
But that others see us differently to how we see ourselves sometimes, and that can contribute to those feelings. But recognizing what's happening and thinking, oh, I'm feeling that imposter syndrome again.
Yes.
Having some strategies to push through that, or doing what you need to do to cope with it, and just realizing that it's a normal thing to happen, and that there's normal reasons why that might come up at that time.
One thing I will add is, and I think how you've described it so beautifully is how it often plays out with actuaries. But I will also mention that there are some genuine biases sometimes. There's some real reasons why we can feel this way. Sometimes it's our own subconscious biases. Sometimes it's real biases from people around us. So if people can't see me standing up, people might not notice that I am very small in stature. So just one quick example from me is, especially back in the day when I was very young as well. So, you know, often people looked at me like I was young when I first got my first management role. But also people literally overlooked me, right? Quite literally.
They were literally looking down at you because you were smaller.
Not even down, but over the top. Like, I'm just so short. And so all sorts of things, I mean, can come into play. And sometimes it's very real. Sometimes those biases need to be called out. I mean, especially if they're being, you know, very detrimental to you. Another very quick example, just a few years ago, I was lining up in line with, I'd been nominated for a teaching award. I was lining up with the other university lecturers that we were getting a photo and a bunch of other things. And the person that came in behind me thought I was a photographer, right?
Oh, wow.
But we're all and yet somehow I'm the photographer. I went to graduation once and the academic, you know, for my students, and the person who was ushering us to various places thought I was the singer, right? So it was hilarious. But, you know, now these days I can take that as, you know, it doesn't bother me, right? because as I've said, I've worked on that kind of thing.
Yes.
It often has come from other people. It's not necessarily something that's been internal. But I think for many actuaries, and especially if I go back to when I was first a manager, it was definitely me. It was just my own lack of confidence. These sorts of things hadn't really happened yet.
Yeah.
As I went through.
But good to know that sometimes it's not just you and something you need to fix. Sometimes it is the people around you. Sometimes it's their biases, or maybe it's even their assumptions or mistakes, genuine mistakes. So whole host of reasons why sometimes you read out of place. Yeah. So going back to our point about talking in front of presenting in front of large groups, and I know you do this all the time. You've been a university lecturer for 7 years now, and I've had far less experience than you in doing this. But I'm interested to know, with more experience, do you still feel nervous before presenting? And what tips do you have for people who are building their confidence in presenting to audiences?
So yes, absolutely yes, I still feel nervous, and I would feel weird if I didn't. I think it's actually very natural, very normal to feel a bit of nervousness, or even more, some people would call it anxiety. For me, it is often just nerves, and I know it. Again, it's like I know.
Like the imposter syndrome,
I can put it in a place. I expect it. I actually have learned how to channel that into something quite positive. So I feel now that when I have that feeling, particularly before a class, and I often present at conferences now as well, it helps me to really focus my mind and just sharpen my thinking. And that's, I think, a part of adrenaline. It's really what I would call it now. It's that adrenaline kicks in, gets you ready for whatever you need to do. And I think that's the way we were made. And usually after, I say, like even now, I'm feeling quite comfortable. After 5 minutes of getting up and talking in my class, I have a very friendly group that helps. Some of the conferences not so friendly, but I still get to a point where I feel comfortable very quickly in that process. But again, this has come with experience. So in terms of tips, the first couple are very standard, I think. So if we're talking about presenting, know what you want to say. So know your content, know your stuff. For me, that's hugely confidence building, and I probably spend a lot of time just making sure I know that. But the reason why I link it with know your audience is I think for lots of new actuaries and new manager actuaries coming through, their audience is often a smaller group, maybe clients or someone internal, your internal team. And they, depending on your audience, they don't necessarily need to know all the detail. And I think sometimes as we become new managers, we're so hung up on all the great technical stuff that we know, all these complex models that we've built, that we've been at least in a part of a team building. And then suddenly we feel like we have to regurgitate all of this to our audience. And often our audience don't need to know all the data. So know your audience. It's usually about getting key messages across. And I would focus very much in your preparation on that sort of story or those key messages.
And want them to take away.
What the takeaway, yeah. And how do you communicate to that? You're very good at this, Julia, I think. And I think for me, as I was coming through, looking at other people that I felt was very good at this. So other managers or people who'd been doing my role a bit longer, even little things from the way they put their slideshow together, or some people didn't bother with that. And how they were just able to speak to those key takeaways, how they were able to communicate with their client in a way that was helpful for their client. Sometimes talking about an inflation assumption in 1996, which is the thing that kind of drives us crazy because we can't remember it, is not even what we need to be worried about. But this kind of comes with experience and time and practice, and having someone coach you along the way, someone ideally who you work with, maybe even your manager, who's able to see, where you might need to do a bit of work to get to that place. That is really helpful. For me, mostly I just looked around and looked what other people were doing. I did have a student that told me when she became a manager, her manager helped her with this. This is something she really struggled with. And he helped her to present to clients and also to present internally to her own team. The next part of this, though, is in the delivery. And I think this is where I spend a lot of my time, in thought time anyway, because I now speak to very large groups. And I've been to a lot of training on this, but just some very quick tips. Things like how you stand. I went to one training session where they made us walk across the stage, so how you walk.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't get too fussed about that if you've got a more traditional actuarial role. But certainly, think about how you're standing. We don't even notice it until sometimes, we actually consciously think about it. our voice. Some people have very naturally loud voices that will go to the back of the room or, however far it needs to go. Others not so much. Some people have a bit of a sing-song in that. Don't get paranoid about these things. I think sometimes we have quirks and we need to embrace them, but also sometimes it's helpful. So for me, for example, I noticed when I first started doing this, I would and my way through things. Probably no one else noticed and no one else cared, but it was something that started to bother me. And I noticed that I just wanted to fill up every silence with words. And silence is fine, especially when you're teaching and even when you're with a client. Sometimes those pauses are okay.
Sometimes they're important.
Very much so. It's people thinking and taking something in and coming up with a question. If all you have is chatter, it often doesn't give you the time to really delve on something quite deeply. So that was one thing for me. Some of the things that trainers had picked up for me were more about my voice. And again, very minor. And, this is now sort of going pointy end of things. But think about your style. And I think this is where a coach helps. I also like to look outside of the actuarial world and I watch TED Talks. I'm not particularly interested in the content most of the time, but I just like to see how people speak. How do they get these messages across? We're in the world of, social medias and Twitters and Instas and, TikToks. And we're really learning how to focus our big messages into ways that people that we need to talk to can understand. I don't love the condensing, and certainly for actuaries, we do such detailed work that we often do need to go into that detail, and that's fine. But I think it's worthwhile thinking about how you want to get those important points across and then practice. That's my main thing. Practice till my eyes bleed and I know things inside out. Over time, I don't need to practice so much. So it's a skill you can build. I don't genuinely believe that.
I think that's really encouraging to hear, Jananie, that it's a skill you can build, because I think sometimes I know I've been guilty of this in the past, that sometimes actuaries say to me, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at speaking. I'm not good at presenting. I'm not that kind of person. I'm a technical actuary. And I think it is comforting to know that you can learn these things.
Yes.
And that even someone with your experience, you still feel nervous before a presentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah.
But that there's strategies that you can use, like understanding your audience, knowing your content, making sure you've got the messages right, getting some review over that if you need it, thinking about your delivery, your posture and your speech and getting it right for the right audience as well, because that can be quite different if you're speaking to a big audience compared to presenting in a meeting, or different people's styles as well. There's lots to think about.
Absolutely. And look, I do also want to add that, I do believe that every person can work on this and can do better. I teach my young children already, stand straight, look up, big voice, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I also think, though, it might not be for everyone. And I think that's okay too. Like if you feel like there are other things that you do exceptionally well, I think that's all right. I think we also sometimes get hung up on we have to be great at everything. Well, actually, you can just play to your strengths too. And I think, again, we talked about the diversity of actuarial roles. I think there's no, we're not cookie cutters. We're not all going to be the same and all be great at everything. You can find roles that, say, are very technical. And if that's what you want, great. But I do think give it a red hot go as well. It's good to sort of get out of your comfort zone every now and then and try to learn something. You tried it, you did it. And then there's no regrets if you go on and do something else. You don't need to feel bad about any of it. But it is okay if you decide it's not necessarily for you.
What you want. Well, I do look forward to hearing your TED Talk one day. But for those of us who may not ever stand on the TED stage, but do still need to feel like their confidence, we still, even if we're in technical roles, we still often need to be speaking in team meetings or delegating tasks as managers. Before you were a university lecturer, you had a long corporate actuarial career, as you said. Did that come naturally to you at the time before you had all this presentation training, or what tips do you have for people who are building their confidence in speaking up in meetings or delegating tasks?
Yeah. I'll start with the delegating task part because, look, surprisingly, this one actually came fairly naturally to me, and I think part of it is I'm a natural teacher. That's just who I am, part of who I am. And I actually saw, and I don't know who needs to hear this, but this is actually now part of your job. When you become a manager, delegating tasks, giving work to other people, and supporting and guiding them through that is actually now part of your job. It's a new phase of your career, and that's actually quite a fundamental part of your role. And so that bit about giving people work, I can see where there's some discomfort in that, but I think and sometimes it comes because roles aren't clearly defined. I think that's a separate thing that really, if that's the thing that's going on that's making you feel uncomfortable, you need to sort that piece out. But otherwise, it's really about the other person who your staff. This is actually their job too, right? They need to be given tasks. So this is all just expectations in these new roles. So giving someone work is one thing, right? But then helping them through it, I think that's the thing. And I've heard this word recently about cocooning. It was mainly in relation to kids and with COVID. Like, how do we get them through this? So, you put the right supports around them. And that's, I think, the same sort of thing is you make sure your staff feel well supported when you're giving them these tasks. Some people you can just throw it to them. They have to dive in the deep end and just swim. For others, they need a bit more support. And you are ultimately usually the one responsible for delivery. So you need to check in. Yeah, as the manager, you need to check in quick up. You need to work out how often you need to check in with your staff. Often great stuff will come to you. Some might not. And there might be reasons why they don't. But you build that kind of rapport, I think, over time with your staff members. Yeah, look, for me, I think it's part of your role. You have to do it. Over time, you'll get better at it. Check in regularly. Make sure they feel like they can come to you. Yeah. So presenting in meetings, though, that part, I think, is actually harder. Again, for me, a lot of it came from watching other people that I had a lot of respect for and I looked at how they spoke up in meetings. One of the tips that I got my students who became a manager said was she volunteered to present in an internal meeting. And that gave her that control, over the thing that she got to talk about. And it also meant that it sort of broke the ice. Now she was doing this thing. And I think sometimes it is just breaking that ice. Because you may not have had to speak up much in meetings before. Now suddenly you might not be running them. I think in some ways it's easier if you're running them because then you're the one that's
your agenda.
That's it. It's when it's more off the cuff, right? That's I think when it's hard.
Making those contributions and finding yourself thinking, should I ask this question or is that a dumb question or is someone going to laugh at me if I say this? And then the next person says it and you think, I was going to say that.
Yeah, and it's a bit of that imposter syndrome again. It's like a full circle moment. What I'm saying, it's not really that valuable. I mean, it's nothing groundbreaking. Well, no one's saying anything groundbreaking. Ultimately, what we're doing often in these meetings is incrementally moving something forward. We're not changing the world in one moment, but we are gradually getting there, and that's what you're doing. You're adding to it. You're building on something and you have a valuable contribution. Again, I'll go back to you've worked your butt off to get to this point. There are good things to say. There's plenty to be said. And again, like I said, I had this great manager when I became a manager who sort of helped me with that confidence boost. I often think it is about confidence. I think also, full credit to actuaries, we're not talking bluffs. We're not going in there getting, we don't want to just
be making it up.
I really want it. And so that's again our high standards and our want to be high achieving. And that's a good thing, I think. I don't think it's something, we want to throw away and just want to, fill space. But there are good, clear ways of doing this. And again, like I'll say it again, it's like a skill. You grow it and, you get better at over time. It's like when you exercise a new muscle, it hurts at the start. Yeah. Over time, it doesn't. And now when I go to meetings, and I still have to do a lot of this in my current role, I think you need to shut me up. I probably have gone too far in the other end. But it did come from a place early on, especially where I did feel most intimidated, probably in those meetings where I couldn't prepare beforehand.
Yeah. And so what did you do if you found yourself in one of those meetings that you felt intimidated and, everyone seemed to be more senior to you and you're worried that if you said something it might be the wrong thing? How did you navigate that, Jananie?
Look, Julie, it was really, really hard. So going back all those years, as I said before, I'm literally the shortest. I was also by far the youngest. There was a lot of, if I look back, I didn't know the name. It was a bit of imposter syndrome. I was also often the only woman. I would go into these meetings. There'd be 9 or 10 men, big boardroom meetings.
Yep.
I was usually the only woman in that space. I didn't care too much about that part back then. Like I wasn't able to really figure out what was going on. I just knew that I felt intimidated. That's really all that I could think of. And to be honest, there were a couple where I was quite silent, but I had my great manager who started to just throw things to me. Now, sometimes I think that can be intimidating in and of itself, but it's kind of that cocooning thing where he made me feel very safe, even in that environment over time. And it didn't take too long, maybe 1 or 2 meetings, before I started to feel that confidence and that comfortable, I felt comfortable enough to speak out more. And he started to just, give me things to say or ask me a question. And he would know that I would know the answer inside out. And so after a little while, I was not being overlooked anymore.
Yeah.
I would listen when I spoke, but it did take, I don't know if coaching's the right word, but more encouragement and support by someone else.
It sounds like you had a great manager who was able to provide that support. And I think also as managers, if we start to think of ourselves as having an obligation to look after our junior people and to support them, even when it comes back to that delegating, sometimes we feel like we're giving them something boring to do, but we're actually giving them an opportunity to do something that they may never have done before.
Absolutely.
So we've got to pay it forward, don't we?
I agree. And looking back, I think even though there were times where that felt uncomfortable and it was a yucky feeling, it has been so worthwhile, right, to have gone through that. And exactly right about delegating. We should be doing this kind of thing before we become managers. I mean, I was a manager quite young, but really we should be, asking our grads to say present to clients, even if it's just a small piece of what they're doing. And then I think that transition becomes much easier if you've already stepped.
Less of a step change and more of a gradual, increase.
But for people who haven't had that, again, don't worry. It's okay. You can learn this skill at any time in your life. You can be young, you can be older. I mean, I've worked on a lot of my presenting skills much later because it's come later in my life as well. So I wouldn't worry where you're at. It's about trying to get to the place where you want to be. And that's different again for everyone.
So recognizing that it's normal to feel nervous. It's normal to, it's okay to feel intimidated in some of those meetings. And some of that comes back to that imposter syndrome. It could be about you and how you're feeling or how you've grown up. But it could also be around some of the personalities in the room or the other people or assumptions that they're making. But then either way, just through practice and by, slowly saying things, saying a little bit more, saying things that you feel confident saying over time, you will feel more comfortable doing that and that will snowball for you.
Yeah, I think so. We're in a good group. I mean, I have a lot of respect for our profession, for actuaries. They're people who usually have a lot of integrity and obviously a lot of intellect. And they're great. I mean, some people might say they're not really people persons, but I think they try to kind of work on those things and they try then to help you get to, like I said, those places that you want to go.
Yeah. And as you said, doing what you need for your role and what you want to do with your career as well. They don't all have to be TED talkers. But most of us need to have some sort of, confidence and ability to delegate work as managers and to present at some sort of meetings as well in the workplace. Yeah. Some great insight there today, Jananie. So before we wrap up, just what advice or top tips would you have for actuaries stepping into their first management roles?
First of all, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. I think sometimes just that feeling of, this is really daunting, this is really intimidating, is enough to be overwhelming. So don't let it be overwhelming. It's very, very normal, very natural to be feeling this with any kind of new role. And I guess from my own personal experiences, I've talked about it a lot, but having good supportive people around you to support you on that journey, having someone that could potentially even coach you through some of these things, even just having good people around you that might not necessarily work with you, who are going through the same sorts of things and, sharing tips and tricks with them. Invest in this. It's great that they're doing your course, Julia. Like this shows that, they care about this and they're thinking about it and they're investing time in it. We minimize what just thinking about something does for you. It actually helps you a lot, just spending that time wondering, why do I feel a bit, not so great, not so confident in this, how can I overcome that? What sort of strategies can I use next time? Or, who can I call on to help me with this particular thing? That's passive. That alone is massive. We could easily put our head under the carpet and not just disassociate and have it done with COVID. Let's pretend it's not happening. That. But to tackle it sort of more head on, but in a way that's not going to be, it shouldn't be anxiety provoking. It should be something that you feel, you should feel empowered to be, that you can do this. And again, as I said before, I think actuaries are in a great place. They should feel empowered, come this far. You can just drop out of the sky into this role.
That's right. It's been a long path. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So go with that. Have confidence in that. Look at all the things you've done that have got you to here, and there's a great future ahead.
Yeah. Fantastic. Jananie Williams, thank you so much. You've talked about imposter syndrome and why that happens to us as high-achieving actuaries, the fact that it's very normal, it's very common, and that there are things that we can do to sort of recognise that, strategies we can use to overcome it so it doesn't get in the way of us doing what we want to do and having the careers we want. That sometimes there's actually real biases in the workplace or people that make assumptions that can influence how we feel in those situations and how we respond. And we can learn how to handle those and choose how we respond. You've talked about how even with your extensive experience presenting, you still feel nervous before a presentation, but there's things that you do. There's actually a process that you go through by knowing your audience, knowing your content, understanding your key messages, and being mindful about how you're delivering that's fit for purpose to that situation. You've talked about how delegating is a really important part of any manager's role. That's actually fundamental to your job. And even though it might feel uncomfortable, it's actually something that needs to happen. And you're actually helping to develop those junior team members by giving them the opportunity to do some work, even if it might feel boring to you. But that communication at the outset and throughout that delegation process is really, really key to successful delegation. You've talked about in meetings how sometimes it can feel very intimidating and, sometimes you don't want to speak up because of maybe your own upbringing or cultural influences or just the people in the room or your fear of saying the wrong thing, but that with support and with practice that can become less scary and more doable as well. And you've talked about how, stepping into that manager role can be very strange and overwhelming, but to realize that actually it's normal to feel that way and that's okay, and to seek support, whether it's peers or managers or other people in your network as well to help you through that transition. So much useful insight. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up today?
Just the last thing is to enjoy it. Enjoy the process. There are so many things that can make us feel anxious and the rest, but trying to find ways to enjoy this. And I never would have expected 15 years ago, I think more than that now, actually, I was my first management role, and I could not have predicted that I'd be doing the sorts of things I'm doing today. So enjoy it and have a hopeful outlook on where it could lead. Again, as I said, as actuaries, we're in a great place and the future is bright in my view.
Wonderful. So enjoy the journey and you never know where your career might take you. So thank you so much, Jananie. That's been such a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you for doing this. Such a great contribution.
Thanks, Jananie.
So there you have it. Real life stories and practical tips from a leader using their actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to get in touch, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your network. You'll find details from today's interview in the show notes below and on our website www.guardianactuarial.com.au. Until next time.